Good morning, afternoon, or evening, ladies and gentlemen, all in crypto here, and welcome back, guys, for another daily cryptocurrency market update. We've got some really interesting things to get into in this video. We're going to be talking a little bit about gold, and actually the fact that gold is a friend of Bitcoin. We saw Texas lawmakers propose a gold-backed state digital currency. And we're going to talk about a number of things that we've seen going on. We've really been talking over the past week about the death of the dollar. It's kind of been the theme of the week. And actually, Bitcoin and gold are competing for the same market share there in an external vehicle to the current financial systems for storing wealth. So we'll talk about this. We're going to bring up Mt.Gox. Repayment window has officially opened. I have been covering Mt.Gox and the repayment since I started this YouTube channel. Nearly 3 years ago, potentially over that, I can't quite remember. The US Treasury has just published a paper on DeFi and illicit finance, and they say that actually DeFi is a place where a lot of this takes place. So we'll be looking at that and then looking at the week ahead. Let's start things off with some charts, guys. We know Bitcoin has ran into some pretty key levels. You can see you had a lot of interaction with this kind of price range here. It's very significant. And actually, it's very common. You guys know the plan that we have in place. You know, we are spot long crypto at this point, and we have been since the start of the year, ultimately making the decision based on a number of things, which we've covered in quite a bit of detail, to take a step back into the market. As we saw the macro changing, we were watching the 2-year yields. And this was all before Silicon Valley Bank, which has really shifted the macro environment. Now, on Friday, we had the non-farm payroll, which saw a beat on non-farm. It saw a beat on unemployment as well, which supports a 2.5 in the next meeting, which is next month. However, I think largely you're going to get CPIs that are lower. We've got a bit of a boring week ahead of us in terms of economic data, nothing too major, and ultimately this is all occurring at a point that's kind of stagnant for Bitcoin. And we've said actually it's very, very common that you have to come back. You don't just want to jump the hurdle being a reference to this kind of level of resistance from being stationary to it. You want to take a step back sometimes, or a kind of a leap to get over it, and that's kind of what Bitcoin's doing. You guys know, I think we've got this kind of 5-wave structure in place for Bitcoin. We think altcoins are lagging behind, but are ultimately going to overperform. We've looked at Bitcoin dominance and the sort of key area that it's currently at. And ultimately, you know, we're waiting for that Bitcoin dominance to come down with the total continuing to rise. And that's going to be alt season. So I do think that is on the horizon. I think Bitcoin's largely gained a bid for a number of reasons. It's typically, and it's very important to note this, where money goes first in the crypto space, because it has the liquidity, it has the volume, in opposition with some of these altcoins. And actually what happens is, as Bitcoin moves, the altcoins, the money kind of trickles down, if you will, and Bitcoin's kind of the start or the top of the mountain. So we've covered to death what we think is going to happen with the price. There's not much to say. You know, if you drop down the time frames, again, sometimes, and we did say on Friday, step away from the charts, guys, because it's going to be a boring weekend. But sometimes you do have to do something like this in order to, just like what gold did, get the sort of ball rolling. But ultimately, you know, we're set on upside. If you've got altcoins out there that, you know, you maybe want to pick up, personally, if we do get any kind of a dip, I'll be taking advantage of it. But what you guys choose to do is entirely up to you. So this is the plan. This is what we have set out. We're going to be diving into altcoins a lot more. The week ahead is largely very, very boring. We've got the FOMC minutes where they're going to discuss prior action and also maybe give some forward guidance. So this may move the market somewhat. This is at 7 p.m. UK time on a Wednesday. That'll be an event to watch, and hopefully the Fed gives some sort of forward guidance. You know, we've seen an adjustment with the yields, and we've seen an adjustment with the kind of rates market on the back end of the non-farm. However, I think that this is done. Typically, trends end, and this is looking at interest rates and kind of forward guiding them. Trends ends on volatility, and I think you've had that. So, on to some news. Now we've covered the price, we've covered the kind of macro generally. You know, we think rates are coming to an end, and ultimately, this is what's driven the markets to the downside is going to be the same thing that drives them to the upside, basically, and that'll be rates being priced to come down or stay in this kind of sideways period, which is what we want. So Texas lawmakers propose a gold-backed state digital currency. The bill state that the trustee must hold significant amount of gold in reserve for all units of digital currency that have been issued and are in circulation. Isn't this interesting? Actually, in 2022, we saw banks buying record numbers of gold. And gold and Bitcoin are friends. They're ultimately anti-fiats. Fiats being the sort of monetary systems that we have broadly. And with the fall and the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, we've looked at things where Yellen's talking about or getting questioned about upping debt to $50 trillion. The monetary system and what they've been allowed to get away with and inflicted on all of us that have used the monetary system that they control is nothing short of criminal. And actually, we're seeing it come into real questionability. And this is essentially why Bitcoin was created. And ultimately, we've got this alternative system, which is crypto, to the fiat. And gold has and always will be, in my opinion, a system of value. So this is one reason why, and this is why I say Bitcoin and gold are friends. We've seen Bitcoin get a real acceleration. And of course, we've seen gold as well. Gold's now, or it was at one point still is over $2,000. And this is despite everything, gold's going on to make new all-time highs, essentially. Whereas I think crypto risk, and we've actually said this, if we get this sideways period for rates, you could see the stock market, and some of the areas of the stock market are already at sort of high points, regardless of everything last year. I think crypto is going to try and catch up to all this, and you actually could see new all-time highs for Bitcoin before you know it. We're dealing with 35K, which is our head and shoulders target, and then we'll deal with higher areas in the sort of 40K range. But ultimately, I do think that if you look at things against the dollar that are alternative vehicles to hedge the dollar, if you will, Bitcoin, I think, is going to do very, very well under that narrative. And we're seeing a real sort of spotlight shift on gold, and I think Bitcoin basks in that sunlight also. It's very, very interesting. And it's going to be certainly interesting to see how this year plays out and if we do see any sort of real, we've got this really steep yield curve that's predicting something major. And I think that major thing has everything to do with the fiat systems and potentially the mass defaults on debt, which would then put questionability on the whole system and push people and herd people into the likes of Bitcoin, DeFi, and of course gold. And this is why we're seeing this real push for it. So it's going to be a very interesting year, guys. Mt.Gox repayment window has opened, but repayments will take some time. So this has always been a doom and gloom kind of threat to the crypto space. I've been covering it for as long as I've been in the market. I wasn't about for the Mt.Gox days back in 2014, I think. However, I've certainly been following the story. The deadline for Mt.Gox creditors to provide their repayment information has now passed, opening the window for repayments that should be carried out by October the 31st, 2023. That said, the repayments will take some time. The deadline for repayments to be made could be subject to change, the Mt.Gox Treasury said. The deadline for Mt.Gox creditors to provide their repayment information has now passed, opening the window for repayments. So this is very, very interesting. This was a letter that was sent out a couple of days ago from Mt.Gox. Ultimately, there is a lot of Bitcoin in Mt.Gox. The US government have a lot of Bitcoin as well. There's always going to be this threat of sell pressure. And we know that the US government actually dumped, I think it was 9,000 Bitcoin in March. Largely did not affect the price. So that speaks volumes. Just a bit of interesting information there. US Treasury recently published this article here titled Illicit Finance Risk Assessment and Decentralized Finance. Now, this was very, very interesting. Executive summary. I won't sort of go in and read this, but it talks about vulnerability unique to DeFi services. Talks about a number of things. Ultimately, and this is why there's a bit of an issue or worry with DeFi. Ultimately, the likes of the United States and the UK do not want people using an alternative financial system where you can get loans because it's direct competition to them, and they're not going to paint it likely in too much of a positive light. But this was a good article. I'll leave this and the actual link to the illicit finance risk for DeFi in the description. US Treasury publishes DeFi-focused illicit risk, financial risk. The US Treasury Department on Thursday published the first illicit finance risk assessment report focused specifically on decentralized finance, or DeFi. A lack of common understanding among industry participants on how AML/CFT obligations may apply to DeFi services, exacerbating this risk. In some cases, industry providers may purposefully seek to decentralize a virtual asset service in an attempt to avoid triggering an AML/CFT obligation without recognizing that the obligation still applies, so as the provider continues to offer covered services. So, and this is the thing with regulations, right? In the US, they will never allow crypto to prevail unless the people in power get overthrown or they regulate it. And they are going to regulate it. And this is another push again. Actually, we said with what happened with Kraken right at the start of the year, that there's a lot of bullish undertones if you look at crypto as an industry and people being able to invest and sort of play in that field with what they're doing with regulations and the kind of war on regulations we're seeing. I always think to myself, who the hell are these guys to tell anybody how to sort of transact with one another? And, you know, if it's a crypto token that you're trading in that's been made up and has a use case and an ideology that is completely separate and has nothing to do with the US government or the banking system, how can they tell you what you can and can't do with that? They've got a total monopoly on this kind of stuff. But I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I did rant about it a little bit yesterday and how it's just a complete joke, the sort of financial systems and the Western governments, to be quite honest with you. But this is a real push. Ultimately, they're saying they want to regulate it here, not necessarily ban it, and that people need to be mindful of that. We've seen them go after Binance for doing a similar thing, not registering, supposedly, even though Binance have a team of, I think it's 200 people in that department, the sort of regulatory department. And this is just another sort of advancement on this. But this was an interesting article, came out literally a couple of days ago. I'll leave it in the description. So there we have it, guys. That is all that I have for you in this daily cryptocurrency market update. We'll see what tomorrow brings, although there's nothing going on for the markets tomorrow, really. And then, of course, we'll see you all in tomorrow's video. That's all I've got for you in this one, guys. If you've enjoyed the content, a like is always appreciated. So is a comment, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next.